Theo, I just want to just take 2 seconds here. I need to just get ready because I don't know if the White House will be starting on time, but the White House press briefing is supposed to start in 2 minutes. So we're going to be bringing you the White House press briefing live. It's supposed to start in 2 minutes, so I'm just setting up here to bring you that. But it is not on yet. So if you want to see Mayor de Blasio talk, more of him, you can go to his social media. But I believe, I haven't heard that it's getting delayed yet, so maybe, boy, it never starts on time, but maybe they'll start on time today at the White House press briefing. So that's coming up in 2 minutes, well, supposedly. Sorry, I'm just looking up here. Yeah, so as soon as I have something to show you on that, I will bring it to you. Yeah, see, Steve Herman says the daily White House briefing is scheduled to begin in a few minutes. I'd assume he's there, so he hasn't said it's delayed yet. This is interesting. I mean, look at this. Number of cases in Ukraine starting 18th March, really taking off there in Ukraine. It's from Live UA Map.
What?
All right, so it is 4:59. Again, it's supposed to start at 5. Oh, Daily Mail is reporting 17-year-old dies in New Orleans from the disease. What are they saying here? 17-year-old dies in New Orleans. A 17-year-old from New Orleans has died from the disease as the city remains on track to become the outbreak epicenter with one of the highest case growth rates in the world in New Orleans. Experts say the crisis in New Orleans was likely accelerated by Mardi Gras, where millions of tourists flocked to the Big Easy over several weeks. That ended at the end of February. The 17-year-old victim is one of the 2 youngest reported across the U.S. after another teen of the same age died in Los Angeles earlier this week. The new teenager who died, we don't know if they had any underlying health conditions. All right, so waiting for the White House press briefing. It's supposed to start any time now. We're going to bring it to you right as it happens. And I'm just keeping an eye and waiting for that. You can send me your comments at Lookner. Jedi M says when Florida takes off, it's going to go supernova, and we're out with all those seniors. I've seen some experts say that they think Florida is going to be one of the big new hotspots. Our viewer Tony Del Monte sent me this. The father of Louisville wide receiver Corey Reed Jr. has died of complications from the disease. Not good. Condolences to his family. Thank you, Tony. JP asks about Austria. Austria, they have Austria. You know, their number of cases went up about between 15 and 20% yesterday. A bunch of new deaths in Austria. They had 31, and it jumped to 49. So the number of new deaths in Austria went up like 60% in one day. Belgium, look at Belgium. Belgium is not a big country. Their number of cases went up by about 20%, 1298 to 6235. 42 new deaths in Belgium. What's the population there? 11 million people. Watch and Pray says California is going to heat up too. They haven't even been testing that much in California. Well, again, over 400 new cases today in Los Angeles County. Dorfler said Turkey had a big jump too. Yeah, we spoke about that. Alabama school is done until the end of the year in terms of in-person schooling. Alabama has all Alabama public school students will study from home beginning April 6th through the end of the year. That is from Stephen Quinn. Thank you, by the way, to Danielle Franks. Thank you, Danielle Franks, for your support. Thank you also, Stephen Finnegan. And thank you, Haley's Comet. I appreciate it. Danielle Franks, Stephen Finnegan, and Haley's Comet. And Bradley Javier. Bradley says Puerto Rico is going to be in trouble. What are the Puerto Rico cases? Is that going to be on the U.S. page? Let's see. We are waiting for the White House press briefing, by the way. It's supposed to start any time now. It's supposed to start 4 minutes ago. Let's see. Who's Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico has 64 cases right now, officially. You know, these states, I think North Dakota tested like 130 people yesterday or something. So, you know, a lot of these states are not testing much, so we don't really know. I mean, generally speaking, in a lot of the U.S., we don't really know what's going on. Oh, thank you also, Abdul Sayed Taha. Thank you, Abdul Sayed Taha, for your support. Thank you. Again, waiting on the press briefing, supposed to start any time now.
Waiting for this news. What Trump gonna say today, man?
Oh, President Trump said it's going to be 10 minutes, and he said this at 4:57. So that means it would start in 1 minute, because it's now 5:07. So 9 minutes ago, President Trump said he's going to be out in 10 minutes. That was 9 minutes ago. So that means in 1 minute it'll start, maybe.
Maybe. We'll see. In this last minute, he might say, "I need 5 more minutes." Give me 5 more minutes. 5 more. I'll be out.
Elmhurst Hospital, which yesterday had 13 people die. Also, Elmhurst Hospital was the subject of a video. Wasn't the video at Elmhurst Hospital? I believe the New York Times posted a video based on an interview with the doctor and footage from inside the hospital and showing it was really some really dire situations there. There's also a popular, a widely shared Twitter thread from a doctor who works at that hospital. But things are bad at that hospital. Yesterday we were reporting that in the previous 24 hours, 13 people had died there. That's in Queens. The NYC Mayor de Blasio called Elmhurst Hospital the epicenter within the epicenter, said hospital has been resupplied with additional ventilators, including 40 provided today, along with 56 additional staff members. Here's an update about New York hospital beds total. Spectrum News. New York City had 20,000 hospital beds before the outbreak. They now hope to triple that number by May, an extraordinarily difficult goal, says Mayor de Blasio. So far, the city has gone to 34,000 total hospital beds. Now, remember, that's not just going to be for patients of the disease, because there's all kinds of people who need hospital beds for other reasons,
Exactly.
too. That's got to serve everybody. Thank you, Alan Williamson, for your support. Thank you, Alan Williamson. Oh, Anne DeLion said Amy Klobuchar's husband got discharged to go home. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that yet. Let me see if I can find something about that. I haven't seen any update on him. Let me know if you have that. I'm searching around. I haven't seen any update that she posted. Did she post today about it? Maybe. Let's see. Oh, here it is. He took a good turn. Okay, so she said, thanks to all who sent kind words and prayers for my husband, John. He has been in the hospital for pneumonia and low oxygen. He took a good turn, was just released, and is now recovering at home. That's very good news. Thanks for letting me know to our viewer.
What?
Hey, thanks for your support, J.B. Beatty. Thank you, J.B. Beatty. I appreciate it. All right, again, anytime now, the briefing is supposed to start, and we will be bringing it to you live. Here's an update on the ventilator situation in New York City. New York City mayor says the city has acquired 2,500 more ventilators than it had just days ago, but that's only about a sixth of what we're going to need to get through this entire crisis. And as we mentioned earlier, BNO News reporting, the U.S. now has the highest number of official cases in the world. Oh, I have to update my headline. But the U.S. has now topped every...
And save the day amid the coronavirus pandemic. So he's going to use his factories to make respirators. If there's a shortage. There's a shortage. And there's a shortage. That's what I didn't get with my tweet.
They've already projected they're almost a million shy. They even talked today about converting some of these factories, which is exactly what Elon's doing on his own. But they said it's going to take at least until April to do the conversion. But Elon is very resourceful.
He's got a hero complex. Remember he was going to save the Thai cable?
Hey, by the way, We need hero complexes. I don't want to spread false hope if you can do it. So Derek's theory of life is he has never done it before, therefore he shouldn't try it.
He should try it, but would you want to use the first respirator that came out of the Tesla?
Yes, if I could take 5 breaths out of it before it poops out, then it's 5 breaths more than I could have taken otherwise. Yes. You would trust the Tesla respirator. What do you think the Tesla respirator is going to do? I don't know, man. It's on autopilot and it crashes.
So, waiting for the president to go live with an update any minute now, apparently.
Also,
And-
New York City.
And I was trying to find some more information on Elon Musk said he's gonna help try to make respirators and ventilators and all this stuff during the shortage.
Jail prison system in New York City, and
But
they've had a lot of cases of coronavirus. There are dozens.
oh, I listened to motherfucking Trump for the longest I've ever listened to him before the other day. I listened to this dude talk for like almost 10-15 minutes, yo. In just like one setting, like. But he made a lot of sense, and like I said, I don't vote for these presidents because I don't want to play their game. Everybody's just a human being. They got their own personal agendas on top of the agenda that's handed to them to follow. And so, like, if they do something that seems good, I can acknowledge that. But for the most part, it's still all a part of a play. You know what I'm saying? This shit is just a show, man. Motherfuckers got all this shit already planned out. But Trump said he doesn't want the solution to be worse than the problem. Which makes sense. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh my God, I broke my hand. And then someone says, let's chop your fucking arm off. Like, whoa. Is that, do I really need to chop my arm off? Because I broke my hand? Can I just kind of like mend my hand and like put some stents and like braces on it, and maybe it'll heal better that way instead of just chopping the whole shit off? And yo, King, but he's just saying the obvious is that America can't go for too long with as much industry and commerce shut down as it is. Like, motherfuckers just can't really go that long. And so he's trying to lift all the restrictions and have everything back to normal by Easter. But a lot of health officials and other people are like speculating that might not be possible. You know what I'm saying? It might not be possible to reopen everything up by Easter. And now
we are waiting for the White House press briefing any time now.
And now they're talking about Florida, saying Florida may be the next hot spot as far as community spread. Florida is a retirement state with a high elderly population, and if Florida turns into one of these so-called hot spots, it's just gonna be this shit all over again. So
Versace is moderating. Lynn G is moderating. Thank you.
but at the same time,
Hug Bomb is moderating.
it's still just hard to trust anything, man. It's hard to trust anything.
Thank you. Also, we have Isabel, Sharon, Craig, JKB, Texas Legends, Brian, Misha, in our Periscope chat room. Thank you there.
But why are we so unprepared for shit like this? And that's why I like studying history,
Thank you also to our
so we can add on to the good and prosperous developments and try to negate all the bad situations that we know historically have happened. Trash bags. This is crazy. This whole scenario is fucking silly as shit, yo. I mean, we know of deadly germs and viruses. Why would we not have a surplus of all medical equipment and personal protection equipment just in case? Motherfuckers got graveyards full of goddamn military equipment. I mean, acres and acres of graveyards with old retired fucking planes, bombers and tanks and vehicles. Like, y'all spent all this money on all this shit right here, and never thought about just beefing up the reserves on the fucking in our medical environment, y'all. Fuck. But y'all can make motherfucking machines of death. These shits cost millions of dollars, millions upon millions of dollars, and then they're out of service in a few years and they're sitting in the graveyard somewhere just rotting. I mean, all that money could have been spent on a lot of other shit. That's why I say, man, if I was the president, yo, my first directive would be to cut military spending, yo. We spend too much fucking money on our military. Entirely too much money. The DEFCON? It ain't no true supplies. They already got all the shit they ever gonna need for the elite. They have like I say, the one most prominent location is that bunker inside the mountain in Colorado. That bunker's been there for over a decade. 2 decades. That shit is stocked up and ready to go with whatever provisions anybody or however many people they can hold to capacity to survive within that shelter for fucking 7 or 8 years without coming out. And there's other locations like that around the world too. And even in Northern Europe, they have like seed banks that can survive almost any kind of cataclysm or weapon assault. Like, these motherfuckers prepare for the end just in case. They ain't got extra reserves and provisions for everybody else in the world, but the few elite who help build these structures, oh, they ain't never gonna worry. So, by the time we reach DEFCON 5, they're gonna be announcing that shit from inside the bunker. America, this is a grave day. Nuclear strikes are imminent. We're reporting to you from our secure contingency bunker.
Well, they haven't started yet. President Trump said 25 minutes ago they were going after.
And that's what the thing is, yo. Like, the elite won't ever have to worry about shit, yo.
So it's 5:20. Greyface said Ireland had a bad day for cases. deaths and 255 new cases. That's from Irish Times. That's not good. But it was 18, 19 cases, so they had about 15% more cases in one day. 10 more patients have died, too. The highest, by far, the highest daily death toll in Ireland, 10. 3 women and 7 men. Also, a record.
Upwork has the world's largest network of independent professionals with experience to bring any skill. It's like having a top-rated developer right here. When you need in-demand talent on demand, Upwork is how.
May God be with us all. No, motherfucker, let me be where you at. Trying to find something real quick.
And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him. Big and broad as to be essentially unlimited. For the first time officially claims the right of the United States to secretly interfere in the internal, political, economic, or military affairs of other countries. The Habsburgs are descended from the Roman emperors. Fair, housing and urban development, interior, labor, state, transportation, and the treasury.
Hey.
Apparently, at least 5 federal agencies are also in residence. Federal Communications Commission, Selective Service, Federal Power Commission, the Civil Service Commission, and the Veterans Administration. 2 privately owned corporations have offices at Mount Weather, the Federal Reserve and the United States Post Office. There is also an office of the presidency. What makes all this upsetting is that there is a president and a religious or financial group alone could ever muster enough power to bring its plan to fruition. One group, you see, would always be opposed by all of the other special interest groups that exist and have always existed throughout history. That is, unless they were all really the... Some countries are well beyond epidemic status. The United States population was infected in 1978 with the hepatitis B vaccine. Them up for execution. Neither did they relish the possible consequences of an enraged public upon discovering that they were being systematically murdered. Of course, a very short but very deadly global war using nuclear weapons upon select population concentrations was contemplated, and to tell you the truth, was not ruled out. The fact that such a population control was even contemplated confirmed the worst fears of those who had participated in the 1957 study. War was put on the back burner to simmer, but may become a reality. In the meantime, something else had to be done that would absolve the decision makers of guilt and place the blame on those who did not lead clean lives. Something that could be blamed upon Mother Nature. What was needed was the bubonic plague or some other horrible but natural disease. The answer came from Rome. Several top-secret recommendations were made by Dr. Aurelio Pacelli of the Club of Rome. He advocated that a plague be introduced that would have the same effect as the famous Black Death of history. The chief recommendation was to develop a microbe which would attack the autoimmune system and thus render the development of a vaccine impossible. The orders were given to develop the microbe and to develop a prophylactic and a cure. The microbe would be used against the general population and would be introduced by vaccine. The prophylactic was to be used by the ruling elite. The cure will be administered to the survivors when it is decided that enough people have died. The cure will be announced as newly developed when in fact it has existed from the beginning. This plan is a part of Global 2000. Funding was obtained from the United States Congress under House Bill 15090 passed in 1969, where $10 million was given to the Department of Defense's 1970 budget. Testimony before the Senate committee revealed that they intended to produce a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist and for which no natural immunity could have been acquired. Within the next 5 to 10 years, it would probably be possible to make a new infective microorganism which could differ in certain important aspects from any known disease-causing organism. Most important of these is that it might be refractory to the immunological and therapeutic processes upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious disease. Sir Julian Huxley said, "Overpopulation is, in my opinion, the most serious threat to the whole future of our species." The project, called MK Naomi, was carried out at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Since large populations were to be decimated, the ruling elite decided to target the undesirable elements of society. Specifically targeted were the black, Hispanic, and homosexual population. The poor homosexuals were encouraged on the one hand and scheduled for extinction on the other. The African continent was infected via smallpox vaccine in 1977. The vaccine was administered by the World Health Organization. According to Dr. Robert Strecker, without a cure, the entire black population of Africa will be dead within 15 years. Some countries are well beyond epidemic status. The United States population was infected in 1978 with the hepatitis B vaccine. Dr. Wolf Zmunis, the ex-roommate of Pope John Paul II, was the mastermind behind the November 78 to October 79 and March 80 to October 81 experimental hepatitis B vaccine trials conducted by the Centers for Disease Control in New York, San Francisco, and 4 other American cities. He loosed the plague of AIDS upon the American people. The gay population was infected. The ads for participants specifically asked for promiscuous homosexual male volunteers. Whatever causes AIDS was in the vaccine. The vaccine was manufactured and bottled in Phoenix, Arizona. Many other population controls have been promulgated. The reduction of the world's population to workable levels has been virtually assured. It is only a matter of time. The problem will be to curtail further human reproduction beyond approved levels. To handle that problem, the New World Order will adopt a communist Chinese model of population control. It is the only population control program that has ever worked. The old and infirm have been periodically murdered, and couples are forbidden to have more than one child. Penalties are so severe that families in China with 2 children are extremely...
Not everybody heard of the book called Behold the Pale Horse? That's that book.
Perdona.
That was actually the author himself reading his own book, Behold the Pale Horse. And that book came out in what, like the late 80s or something, or late 70s or 80s? And he was already predicting like them using different viruses and everything to thin out the global population. All right, so this is Trump Live.
96-0, and as you know, a couple of those people are quarantined, and one, Rand Paul, is he's actually got it, but he'll be better. He's been a great guy. He's been a great friend of mine, actually. The massive $2.2 trillion relief package includes job retention loans for small businesses with loan forgiveness available for businesses that keep their workers on the payroll. It's pretty good. Loan forgiveness, keep the workers on the payroll. It's pretty good. Direct cash payments will be available to American citizens earning less than $99,000 per year, $3,400 for the typical family of 4. Expanded unemployment benefits. The average worker who has lost his or her job will receive 100% of their salary for up to 4 full months. These are things that, by the way, we have plenty more to go, but they're things that nobody's ever had any package like this done, and I just want to thank them. Hopefully it'll get approved equally easily in the House. Really, I think it will go through pretty well from what I hear. Virtually everybody. There could be one vote, one grandstander maybe. You might have one grandstander. And for that, we'll have to come back and take a little more time, and it'll pass. It'll just take a little longer. But let's see whether or not we have a grandstander. Critical support for the hardest hit industries with a ban on corporate stock buybacks and tough new safeguards to prevent executive compensation abuse. Over $100 billion for our amazing doctors, nurses, and hospitals. $45 billion for the Disaster Relief Fund, more than doubling the amount available. This is tremendous stuff. $27 billion for the coronavirus response, including $16 billion to build up the strategic national stockpile with critical supplies, including masks, respirators, and all sorts of pharmaceuticals. $3.5 billion to expand assistance to child care providers and child care benefits to healthcare workers, first responders, and others on the front lines of the crisis. And these are really brave, incredible people, I have to say. And some of them are getting sick, and some of them are getting very sick, and some of them don't even recover. They're incredible people. $1 billion for Defense Production Act procurement. We are, as you know, using the act, but we use it only when necessary. We use it as leverage. We generally don't have to use it to accomplish what we want to accomplish. As of today, FEMA has shipped over 9 million N95 masks, 20 million face masks, 3.1 million face shields, nearly 6,000 ventilators, 2.6 million gowns, 14.6 million gloves, and we're sending more every day, and we've got tremendous amounts of equipment coming in. A lot of great companies are making equipment right now. The ventilators, obviously,
I got
take
gloves and masks for
a little
months.
longer to make, but we have a lot of companies making, and we're going to be in great shape. We took over an empty shelf. We took over a very depleted place in a lot of ways. As you know, the testing is going very, very well, and that was obsolete and broken, and we fixed it, and it's been going really good. And I think, very importantly, the stockpile, we're really filling it up, and we fill it up rapidly, but we get it out. Sometimes we have it sent directly to the states instead. And again, the state has to be doing this kind of a thing also. We're sort of we look from behind a little bit, and we look at how are they doing, and if they need help, we do it. But it's their first responsibility.
I got no mask,
Sometimes
bro.
they just can't get it. But we load it up.
I got a bunch of gloves. I got respirators. Fuck a mask.
We want it to go directly to the point where we want it.
Like if I feel like that shit getting real bad in my area, like I'm wearing my respirator out the house, yo. Fuck that.
Incredible naval hospital ship.
And goddamn, and I got a full face respirator. But now I throw that shit on and go to the grocery store like it ain't
Will
nothing.
be underway to New York City on Saturday. So it's going to be leaving on Saturday.
17 days after.
3 weeks from now.
Who said that though?
The maintenance quickly, and we're going to be there for quite a while.
I ain't trying to downplay this shit, man, but it's like
It should be arriving. I told the governor 20 minutes ago, and Cuomo, that the ship will be arriving New York Harbor on Monday. I think
The
I'm
CDC?
going to go out and
I don't know, man.
kiss it goodbye. I'll go to.
I think this is definitely a way to usher in like
I will go and we'll be waving together.
a soft military motherfucking occupation.
Great ship. It's a great vessel, it's right. So
That's my main concern now, because even after all this pandemic scare and viral scare is over with, like
it's loaded up to the top. And
a lot of rights already been violated. Telling motherfuckers you can't assemble, you can't peacefully assemble and all that shit, man. That shit in the Constitution, nigga.
we were saving about 3 to 4 weeks by the incredible work done by the Navy. And I actually look forward to Saturday to see it go. The ship will arrive, and I believe it's going to get a little bit of a sermon. It's just something very beautiful about it. It's an incredible piece of work. They'll be landing at Pier 90 in Manhattan to provide hospital surge capacity for the New York metropolitan area. So it's a surge capacity. They may use it for this, or they may have other people coming in from hospitals unrelated to the virus, and then they'll use those hospitals on land. They'll use those hospitals for the virus, but we'll see how they do it. They could do it either way, one way or the other, whichever one is best. But it could be, because it's set up so well for a regular hospital.
Now this is, you can't hardly see it, but that's my Facebook post from, well, let me see if I
Treatments and therapies that can effectively reduce the duration and symptoms of the virus and help.
All right, Travis Prince
Help people.
posting coronavirus pandemic in Wuhan on January the 18th, bro. January, I've been keeping up with this shit since like the goddamn first couple weeks in January. Like I actually saw an article before this, I just didn't think it was that bad, and then the second article I seen, I was like, all right, let me start sharing this shit, bro. But yeah, I know it's global. I know what's going on, dude. Like I've been keeping up with this shit since damn near day one. That's why I'm listening to it now. So I fully understand all the implications from every angle.
But it's very
You know?
advanced, and the vaccines are very advanced prior to, as you know, fairly reasonably long tests for, in that case, over a year. Every American should be proud of the incredible spirit our country has brought to this effort. It's been incredible. Citizens from all walks of life have come together to turn the tide in this battle. We're witnessing the extraordinary power of American unity like a lot of people have never seen. Even getting a vote, we're talking about trillions of dollars, and you get a vote of 96 to nothing. We are waging war on this virus using every financial, scientific, medical, pharmaceutical, and military resource to halt its spread and protect our citizens. I want to express our tremendous thanks to the American people for continuing to practice social distancing like you people are practicing right here. I don't know, this room may never be the same. Maintaining good hygiene and follow government guidelines. Vice President Pence lifts up that card every time. And it's not very complicated, but hopefully you can do that. And your commitment will make all the difference in the world, and that's one of the big ones will be, for a while, stay home. Just relax, stay home. Making a lot of progress. As we continue to gather more information and accelerate the testing, where we're doing record numbers of tests now, far more than any other country has done. As I told you yesterday, 8 days here, because you heard so much about South Korea. The media kept up with South Korea. We have a great relationship with President Moon in South Korea. But when I hear so much about South Korea, so in 8 days, we do more testing than they did in 8 weeks. And it's a very highly sophisticated test. So we'll be able to deploy even more data-driven and targeted approaches to slow the ultimately, it's a very devastating thing, but we will vanquish this virus, and it's a lot of progress.
I've been in the house since the VCR, baby. You know, early 80s, 81, 82, when I got my own VHS headset. I don't come outside, bro. Kung Fu movies, anime, porn. That's it. Action movies. What don't you want? That's what I'm saying, yo. People keep fucking with talking about these masks. If it's airborne, it don't matter.
We're going to be talking about dates. We're going to be talking with a lot of great professionals. This is a country that is built on getting it done. You know, people want to go back to work. I'm hearing it loud and clear from everybody. So we'll see what happens. We're going to have a lot more.
I keep my little one in the car with me because I ride around with that shit just in case I may need it. But if you really want to not get infected with some airborne shit, bro, this is what the fuck you need. Not some M95 mask or whatever kind of dust mask or whatever shit, bro. This is a full face respirator. Now this is going to keep you safe from all kind of germs and viruses. If you ain't got one of these, I mean, that's why you see like the real motherfuckers in like the real infected areas, they have this on. They wearing these, not some mask that's only here made out of cotton and paper with some elastic rubber band on it. Motherfuckers in a hard hit area, you don't wear that shit, bro. That shit ain't gonna stop shit.
Seriously affected, and we may do it that way, but we've got to start the process pretty soon. So we'll be talking to you a little bit more about that next week. And with that, if you have any questions, you could ask.
If you can breathe with a mask on, you can get it. Yeah, but doctors use masks in like a more sterilized environment too, and they go into a really sterile environment knowing who and what patient has it. And then even, and once again, in the hard hit areas, the doctors are catching it, and the doctors are dying. Are supposedly the doctors and nurses are catching it. Like that was the whole big thing. Like the very first doctor who tried to get it out to the public, and when he died from the Wuhan Chinese virus, people don't want to say that, but well, he died from. He's like, see, it's killing the doctors. So yeah, doctors wear the mask too, but it's still like doctors apparently are getting sick from the same shit. You know, unless the proper precautions are taken, and you're sterilizing everything, you're washing your hands, you're bringing in patients, you bring one patient at a time into a sterile environment, and or whatever, you know.
The hidden enemy, as I say, it's a hidden enemy. Sometimes a hidden enemy is a lot tougher than somebody that's staging and finishing. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, we're fully expecting them at least in DC.
Some troops along the Canadian border.
Yeah.
Why is that necessary?
Well, we have very strong deployments on the southern border, as you know, with Mexico, and we had some troops up in Canada, but I'll find out about that. I guess it's equal justice to a certain extent. But in Canada, we do have troops along the border. You know, we have a lot of things coming in from Canada. We have trade, some illegal trade that we don't like. We have very strong sanctions on some. We have very strong tariffs on dumping steel. And we don't like steel coming through our border that's been dumped.
Dice, you must be haven't been in my stream in a minute, but this is what I've been telling people forever, bro. Being prepared now, like getting shit now, is fucking ridiculous. Going out trying to scramble for shit and trying to stockpile on shit now. Where if you're just a sensible person and just plan for any type of emergency event. And for me, like I say, man, I'm from a coastal state in the South, South Carolina, bro. And I'm only 45 minutes from the coast. And our hurricane season is bad sometimes. Motherfucking El Nino come through there and fuck shit up, bruh. Hurricane Hugo, Andrew, Ike. What was the last other hurricane? Some shit with a W. I don't know. But just for situations like that, like hurricane season, you need food and water, and just in case you get flooded out, or power lines are down, or whatever may happen. Flashlights, batteries, candles, like those shits are just essential for, or it seem like it should be essential for people. You know, extra whatever. And now I live in the great Northeast, where our winters are just fucking harsh and brutal, and they're long. And sometimes you have whiteouts and blizzards and fucking winter weather conditions where the advisory is not to drive because you have 90% fucking ground freeze with black ice because it rained and then froze and rained and froze. And so like just having shit in the house should just be commonplace for everybody. And so that when there is some sort of emergency like this, you don't have to rush out and fight people for toilet tissue. I'm not saying don't wear the mask or the mask isn't efficient or is not gonna work. Ain't nobody hating on you, bro. This shit just, you know what I'm saying? There are more efficient things than a fucking paper mask. You know what I'm saying? Oh. But still, I mean, we all in the same boat, bro. Everybody feeling the hit. Everybody got the same amount of pressure on them. You know what I'm saying? Like I say, some people prepared, some people not prepared, some people feel like they don't need to be prepared. You know me, I got work tomorrow. My job is basically the same. They cut my hours a little bit, you know what I'm saying? But it's basically the same. I gotta go to work tomorrow. You know, I stopped by the gas station in the morning, got me a cup of coffee. Normal shit. You know? But I got hella food and water and shit stashed up too, just in case. Just in case the shit hits the fan. Yeah, anything that can decrease the chance is absolutely better than not trying to decrease the chances at all. I can't wait to put this shit on. I got some full military gear too, bro. You know what I'm saying? Come out this bitch camo down. Wanting a motherfucker to start some shit. Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, I'm gonna go right to the grocery store just like this, yo. Go right up in the grocery store, buy me some ice cream and some cereal. Like it's normal. You know, this is just normal now. This is how the fucking world is, bro. This is the shit we live with, you know, when motherfuckers walk around like this just to go buy some ice cream. All I want is some chocolate chip cookie dough. I can't leave the house without my personal protection equipment. You know what I'm saying? I pull up to the drive-thru at McDonald's like, yo.
Let me get a number 7. I bought a whole case of pasta. This motherfucker gonna survive off of straight carbs. I don't need nothing but carbs, yo. Just pasta. Pasta and some hot water. I'm good. See me, I brought cans and cans of meat. Canned meats. I got tons of canned meats. And then I got like an inside connect, yo, like I ain't gonna disclose my connect. I was about to tell y'all something, but when shit get real bad, I need to be one of the few people to know about this shit. So I'll save that cookie for myself. Oh, the seeds are where it's at. You ain't got no seeds. Oh man, you can't grow a goddamn carrot, huh? You ain't got no potatoes or tomatoes. Damn, like you gonna go hungry. Cause I got squash. You know what I'm saying? I got peppers, fresh peppers, lettuce. You like beets? I got some beets. Motherfucker gonna be eating good over here. Gonna be eating good over here. Yo, I got the hook up. Yo, like, I ain't gonna lie, yo, like I said, in October of last year, I brought a case of tissue. I ain't know about this shit. I went to the hardware store. It had a fucking case of tissue on sale. I was like, shit. Let me get that now while it's on sale. That's an ass of tissue for a little bit of money. That's like 50 cents a roll. You know, I gotta get that. You know how much tissue I still got left? A lot. I keep thinking about selling this shit like $5 a roll, yo, when shit get real bad. I mean, you can rough it for real. You can use a handful of leaves or grass, old rag, or whatever you may have. But I got this tissue. You know you want to wipe your butt with this Charmin's. Oh, you already know that. They're going to give away all this money because this shit don't matter no more, man. Our dollar ain't worth shit, man. And that's how Trump knows if you don't get this shit back on the ball soon, ain't no coming back. Ain't no coming back from this, yo. The dollar's going to tank. And the world going to be like, damn, America, y'all weren't prepared for this shit? Junk mail. That's all this shit is. That's all it's gonna be. Motherfucker gonna be walking around with wheelbarrows of money. That shit don't mean nothing. That's why they trying to get this new digital currency popping. All you buying is disinfectant. What? Nani. My homeboy sent me this right here too. Is coronavirus the new 9/11? And that's what made me look at all this shit different, yo, because I done survived. Damn. I done survived Y2K. I done survived 9/11. I done survived 2012. And it's like, how many more times the world gonna end before the world actually ends, yo? That's like, until that shit hits my area, like until it like sufficiently impacts the area that I actually live in, I'm not worrying about this shit. Now New York and Philly, they fucked up. That's them big ass cities. They try to do that shit around here, I'm the fuck out, yo. I'm not. But as far as I see, that's how it's so weird. Like some areas is like really, really bad, and then some areas is not really, really bad. And Corona is slow motion 9/11. Oh, our supermarkets are over here empty too. And then I read a story earlier today, yo. This shit crazy, yo. There's like some dumbass local. All right, this is just a little small township. They got one grocery store. Some local crackhead type person, always starting trouble. She's in and out of jail a lot. She goes up in a grocery store and starts coughing on all the fucking produce. Like all the fruits and vegetables, just start coughing on that shit, making a big scene. Yo, the grocery store said they had to throw all that shit out, yo. They say they lost like $35,000 worth of inventory because of one person coming there acting like a fucking fool, yo. Yeah, everything we know is from the news. That's why you gotta find like alternative news sites. There are people who do report the news without a personal bias. People who just want to report what is really going on. That's the whole thing. Where did they throw it at? I don't know. They didn't say that in the article. All they said was that they had to take out all of the inventory and fucking call in like a sanitation cleaning crew to sanitize the whole area of the supermarket. They said they went through their surveillance footage and made sure they sanitized everywhere that the lady had walked through the grocery store. And But yeah, they didn't say how or where they disposed of the produce. And then saying that the lady probably doesn't even have it. You know, she's probably not even, she hasn't contracted COVID-19. She just walked in there just to do some dumb shit, you know. But people don't want to take any chances. Yo, $35,000 worth of inventory. $35,000. One person caused a loss. All food. I'm throwing that bitch under the jail. I put her in isolation in a prison. 6 months. I mean, I'm gonna give you 3 years, 4 years, and you're gonna have to figure out a way to pay all this money back. But for the first 6 months, you're gonna sit in a little teenage room by yourself. Fuck that. That's some dumb shit. All right, Trump is still talking, believe it or not. It's something, bro.
Until you have the data yet.
I want those guidelines to go even when we're open and fully operational. And frankly, much of the guidelines, like shaking hands, maybe people aren't going to be shaking hands anymore. You know,
that's what I'm saying. Like the world is changing, yo. Like shaking hands was almost like signing a contract. You know, do you agree? I do agree. Let's shake on it. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't even fucking shake hands no more, yo.
We didn't do that.
But you know, just not trying to big up black people, but we stopped shaking hands a long time. We came up with that shit like bam. You know what I'm saying? Just different shit.
Great things are gonna, when we're open, just a few. When we're open, as soon as we open. That doesn't mean you're going to start.
She'll get a test before us. You know how you can get a free corona test? Go coughing in the fucking grocery store. They'll come test you.
I also have 2 questions because I'm asking on behalf of Foreign Press as well. So one domestic question, one international. Domestically, you just tweeted saying that totally protect Asian Americans.
Yes,
definitely going to bring out the worst of people.
Very important to me. We have to protect our Asian Americans. It's a very important. That was a very important tweet to me because I didn't like things that I was hearing. Please go ahead.
What's the concrete measure that you're taking to combat the?
I got popcorn all in my teeth.
Well, I don't know. All I know is this. Asian Americans in our country are doing fantastically well.
All right, guys, we've been here for an hour. I need to go ahead and hit these brushes.
I think they appreciate the job we're doing. But I did want to put that statement out, the social media statement, because to me, Asian Americans are a great part of our country. Thank you all very much. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. The White House Coronavirus Task Force met today. We continue to move out on President Trump's directive to slow the spread with mitigation, and to advance and expand testing across the country, and to work on the critical supplies that our healthcare workers in our nation needs. Today, the President convened the nation's governors, all of the states and territories, and reiterated to them that with FEMA in the lead, our approach is, our response to the coronavirus in this country is locally executed, healthcare workers, local public health officials. It is state managed, and it is federally supported. We took the opportunity to thank all of the governors across the country, of our states and territories, for the incredible leadership and the partnership they've forged with this administration. We were able to confirm that 10 major disaster declarations have been issued, most recently to New Jersey, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, and Illinois.
We spoke to them about the importance of.
This is the only time I ever listen to Trump talk is on this shit.
It will come before the representatives tomorrow midnight. And we're grateful.
Corona, is that you?
In working for that unanimous.
Is that you, Corona?
Bipartisan vote of the United States Senate last night. In addition to direct payments for American families, the
in addition to direct payments,
receive a direct payment.
How do I get my direct payment? I need the monties now, government. I need the monties now, government.
Spoke about.
Give me my money.
On the payroll for a period
I need monies.
Even if the restaurant or the business is not open. With the governors, though, we talked about the $150 billion in direct aid to the states, $100 billion in direct assistance to hospitals, and of course the expansion of unemployment benefits to make sure that our states have the resources to meet the challenges that were so evident.
What do you mean, Dice Cream, Matt? The government will help you.
Testing, pleased to report the testing is available in all 50 states. And in partnership with commercial labs across America, this morning we received word that 552,000 tests have been performed and completed all across the United States. We want to thank the American Hospital Association and hospitals across the country.
The same thing from 2008 with the housing market crash. The same thing, bro.
Fulsome way the results of those tests.
We still went into a depression. People don't want to call it a depression, but shit was fucked up for several years. You know what I'm saying? After 2008, like, it took a minute for shit to come back straight. And they gave $1.4 trillion bailout to the fucking banks and the auto industry. It's the same fucking thing now, except it's 2.1 trillion or some shit. Whatever, it's still a fucking bailout, and it's still going to be a recession afterwards. And just like, once again, like in 2008, yo, it was the same fucking scenario where shit was fucked up. They injected huge amounts of cash into the system, and the shit was still rough afterwards.
Swabs. The FDA did announce earlier this week that testing symptomatic patients by swabbing from the front of the nose is perfectly appropriate. And it's already begun across the country. It allows for self-collection and also leaves the burden on healthcare protection. It saves personal protective equipment from being expended.
I can't really listen to Pence, yo. Come on, Pence.
And Dr. Birx will speak about the importance and the availability of swabs. But with regard to supplies,
could you imagine, like, if something happened to Trump and then this motherfucker was our president?
National strategic stockpile. More than 9 million N95 masks for healthcare workers, 20 million surgical masks, 6,000.
All right, you guys already said those numbers already.
Millions of gloves and gowns and face shields. In addition to that, we are working with a number of suppliers to manufacture ventilators.
I don't know, man. You took so long, bro. That shit is done.
To assess not just what ventilators are available in their state.
That shit is.
What ventilators are available.
I'll let you write something on this one, on this one right here. When I start working on this one, you guaranteed a slot somewhere on this wall right here. But that one right there,
let me also say thank you to the
that's already put to the side.
And Dr. Mary Peterson.
Dr. Mary Peterson.
American Society of Anesthesiologists actually produced a video. Tomorrow they will host a webinar.
Okay. Yeah, but we're talking about adults for one, so you have to rule out kids, anyone under the age of 18. You have to rule out that section of the population, and anyone who makes more than I think they said like $90,000 a year, you have to rule out that section of the population. And so they're not going to they're not going to split it 300 million ways. And actually it's, they're giving, billions of dollars at a time to different corporations and subsidies and what they're calling interest-free loans or whatever. They're going to give, billions of dollars to CDC to beef up their science labs. They're going to give billions of dollars for stockpiling on essential medical equipment, just in case we have to go through this again. And so, like, they're not just going to split up that fucking money, individually, which they could, but that's why you're only getting $1,000. Ain't that the truth? Can't eat money. Oh, I put it down without playing something. What are we going to watch? Better late than never. It's better late than never, man.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
Really? Oh my god, yo. My bad, guys. So I'm trying to look up some older, just an older documentary. Not Rona. Not looking for anything specific. I'm just looking for something with a date that's a few years old. Alright, so this is, that was, like I said, Bill Gates. He's one of the few people, did anybody ever say it other than Bill Gates? But here's Vox, what is Bill Gates afraid of? This was 4 years ago. Yeah, but this type of scenario is not new. It's not like people have not hypothesized what would happen, what the outcome would be. There's tons of fucking movies and TV shows that are based on this very same premise. And it's like, why aren't people still prepared for this shit? Why aren't governments in large prepared for this?
Fortunately, there's very few things, and most of them are very low probability. some big volcanic explosion, gigantic earthquake, asteroid. But at least in the nuclear case, you've got to say we take it quite seriously. We budget a lot of money, have a lot of people who think about nuclear deterrence, and I'm very glad that work's being done, and I rate the chance of a nuclear war in my lifetime as being fairly low. I rate the chance of a widespread epidemic far worse than Ebola in my lifetime is well over 50%. If we look at the 20th century and we look at the death chart of the 20th century, I think everybody would say, oh yeah, there must be a spike for World War I. Sure enough, there it is, like 25 million. And there must be a big spike for World War II, and there it is, it's like 65 million. But then you'll see this other spike that is as large as World War II, right after World War I. And most people, a lot of people would say, what was that? There's two kinds of flus. There's flus that spread between humans very effectively, and there's flus that kill lots of people. And those two properties have only been combined into a widespread flu once in history. Well, that is Spanish flu. We have no idea where it came from. It's called the Spanish flu because the Spanish press was the freest. They were the first to talk openly about it. And so in the annals of epidemic history, that's the big event. I funded a disease modeling group that uses computer simulation, and that work has been phenomenal in helping us target our polio eradication resources and which parts of Nigeria should we work harder on. And it's very natural, if you have a group like that, to say, hey, look at something like a Spanish flu in the modern day. Health systems are far better. And so you think, hey, that wouldn't be very bad. Well, we tried it, and there are some assumptions we had to make. But what we showed is that the force of infection because of modern transport, which compared to 1918 is over 50 times as great. And so if you get something like the flu, and you look at that map of how within days, it's basically in all urban centers of the entire globe, that is very eye-opening. That didn't happen with Spanish flu in the past. The opportunity to do more than just let it run its course is really only in the last decade. Basically, when you talk about drugs, you can talk about small molecules or talk about these complex biological protein-like things, of which there's a subclass called antibodies. Antibodies are the molecules that the immune system naturally builds to attack disease. Today, the idea that somebody says, oh, here's an antibody, make a lot of it, make it very quickly, that's right on the cutting edge. And the Ebola epidemic showed me that we're not ready for a serious epidemic, an epidemic that would be more infectious and would spread faster than Ebola did. This is the greatest risk of a huge tragedy. This is the most likely thing by far to kill over 10 million excess people in a year. We don't need to invest nearly what we do in military preparedness. This is something where less than $1 billion a year on R&D, medical surveillance, standby personnel, cross-training the military so they can play a role in terms of all the logistics here. This can be done, and we may not get many more warnings like this one to say, okay, it's a pretty modest investment to avoid something that really, in terms of the human condition, would be a gigantic setback.
PA-ABLE accounts are available to help people with disabilities and their families.
Like I said, I heard that years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, probably not as soon as he had that conversation or that interview, but I'm pretty sure within the same year. Just because I like to keep up on shit like this. Like, people have plenty predictions about what can happen, how the scenario would play out, and if we're prepared or not. And Bill Gates, who gave you Apple, wait a minute. That fucker did Apple, right? Anyway. Motherfucker's a genius. You know who can sit around and think about shit like this? People like that who got all the time on their fucking hands, yo. Can sit back and hypothesize. What's the greatest threat to mankind right now? Is it an asteroid? Is it earthquakes? Is it nuclear warfare? You know what? Probably our greatest threat is motherfucking germs and viruses. Shit's gonna kill us. Seeing what the fuck, how hard it was to get a hang on Ebola. Oh, got the shaky hand. And so, coronaviruses are nothing new. And speculations that we are not prepared for another global pandemic is not new. So why in the fuck is all this bullshit happening right now? Is it by design? Was this orchestrated and engineered in order to be carried out in such a way to cause mass hysteria so we can implement some sort of martial law scenario and weaken the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, eroding our freedoms, just as what happened after 9/11, those attacks, where 19 Muslim extremists with box cutters. Yeah, right. Fuck out of here. You know, they wanted me to believe that shit, and they want me to believe this shit too. That's why it's so fucking hard to believe anything now, because bitch, you lie. The government gonna lie to you, piss in your face, and tell you it's raining. What the fuck is raining, bro? What? Was it me? Look, the clouds. You missed them. Clouds just went away. Smells like piss. It does? The rain smells like piss? Wow. It's freaky, bro. Freaky. Yeah, them motherfuckers will try to get you to believe anything. Anything, bro. They will. And so that's why I gotta just, like you say, man, be prepared. But be watchful. Do I like listening to Trump? I really don't. I really don't like listening to him and Vice President Pence. But just in order to, like, kind of keep up with the fuck these motherfuckers is saying, you just gotta listen to it for a minute. Make sure you hear what's coming out of their mouth. Because Trump said this shit was a hoax to start with. Now it's, look where you at, bro. Thought you said this shit wasn't real. Now look at you. $2.1 trillion later. Shit feel pretty real, don't it? Because Idris Elba got it. He looked fine, though. He just, And it's the weird thing is, like, his wife is still right there. He's like, yeah, I'm just self-quarantined. My wife tested negative for it. And, bitch, why you around him? I know y'all married and everything, but should you not, like, scoot over a little bit? Nah, nothing. He said, I don't know what, Don't know what to believe. Don't know what to believe. Believe None of what you hear and half of what you see. None of what you hear and half of what you see. Because you might think you saw a spaceship, but was it really? Was it really a spaceship though? Was it really a ship from outer space? You know? Hard to believe what you see, even with your own eyes. So believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. Well, I heard, man, look, man, I don't even want to hear that shit. You starting out wrong already. You heard it from who? And who told it to them? That's my favorite line, though. Yo, you know what I heard? Bruh, I just heard. I just heard that the bird is the word. Bird, bird, bird. Bird is the word. It said the bird, bird, bird. Bird is the word. It said bird, bird. My bad, guys. Man, this brush looking kind of frazzled. Do I have to give you a haircut? You son of a gun. Cause these bristles act like they ain't want to cooperate. I need to get this might be sharp enough. I don't know. But I normally do this with a razor blade. Just come on. Are you gonna come off? Yeah. No, you're not. Stupid bristles curling up on me. Like you don't know what time it is, boy. You know what time it is. Run that shit. It's not sharp enough. Where's my razor blade? Here's a razor blade. Ooh. Come out, razor blade. Why? Oh my God. Why is it so hard to slide out of there? Jesus H. Christ. Alright. Let's try this again. Gotta shave some of these little bristles. Can't have y'all scragglers. Alright, ooh, back to a nice pencil tip. Gotta have that pencil tip. Da 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 do. Alright, trying to put something else on. Let's see. So was this really published a year ago? Spanish flu, a warning from history. Cambridge University published 1 year ago. Let's see what they say about, I mean, people talk about this stuff. There is no way we're as unprepared as we are.
Perhaps until recently, Spanish flu has been what some people call a forgotten pandemic. But it was a huge global calamity. In terms of the number of deaths, we're saying 50 to 100 million, far greater than the casualties of the First World War. Roughly around April, May 1918, when, the carnage of the First World War is graphic and horrendous. But at the same time, this unknown enemy is starting to sweep through the US, Europe, the trenches, and it is recorded by the Spanish press, and it becomes dubbed as the Spanish flu, because they are neutral. Well, at the time, in the 1920s, they estimated that maybe 20 million had died. By the late 20th century, that figure had been up to 25 million. In the 21st century, with scientists and historians now getting together to work much more closely, that figure has now been upped to 50 to 100 million people killed. This virus killed more people in the first 25 weeks than HIV/AIDS has killed in 25 years. Horrendous. I mean, those mortality statistics are staggering.
We don't know exactly why some flu strains are much more severe than others and why some of them would be more likely to kill people or cause very severe disease.
What is particular about avian and pandemic viruses is that they replicate deep inside our lungs. When our cells detect this and trigger a very strong innate immune response, this leads to an influx of white blood cells and fluids into our lungs, and it restricts the amount of airspace that we have to breathe.
The symptoms are very graphic and very, very striking. So, it's said that some people drowned in their own phlegm. So if it was hitting or affecting the lungs, people were spurting blood from their ears and their noses. Descriptions of people turning blue or purple. So, it was really, really severe. And people just dropping down in the streets. Those that succumbed to the flu were in the age group 20 to 40 years, which is very unusual for an influenza epidemic or pandemic. And scientists and historians are now still looking to see why.
There's really two ways that people died in 1918. They either died from the initial flu infection, or they died from an enormously strong immune response to that virus where their lungs just filled up with fluids from trying to attack the virus that got into their lungs.
So traditionally, everyone sort of said, oh, well, it was the trenches and, the conditions of the war, and that's why it was so fatal. But then you think, well, how did it spread so rapidly around the world to places that are not part of the theatre of war? I think the traditional explanation is it starts in Kansas, in an army camp, and then the troops bring it over to the trenches of Europe. But there's still many, many unknowns.
So mathematical modellers have long been interested in the 1918 pandemic, and one of the questions is to try and disentangle how it spread around the world and exactly what the routes have been. Given perfect data, you could work backwards and try to infer where it's come from. Whereabouts does it arrive in a country? Does it arrive multiple times? Or thinking about multiple countries, where is the first place? If you understand the origin of a pandemic, then you understand something about where it's come from, and maybe you can stop that in future.
Almost certainly it was a bird flu originally. But then, we also know that that flu, or something very similar to it, was in pigs at the same time. Maybe it's somebody who works very closely with birds, or who works very closely with pigs, or has some other exposure like that. One of the big, really open questions in flu research and flu public health is, how does the virus adapt from one species to another? How does, for example, a virus in pigs or in birds get into humans and then start transmitting? Then the key question is, how does the virus then adapt within that person to stop being a pig virus or a bird virus and become a human virus? In other words, to be able to transmit from human to human. And it's probably some very quick evolutionary process that is going on within that human, and in many cases won't be successful, but in a few cases will, and that's when the virus can start spreading between humans and become a flu pandemic, and then stay in humans as regular seasonal flu.
Just people were celebrating Armistice Day, and there was hope that it was going down, but they researched a far more deadly and virulent strain emerged. So this second wave really spread like wildfire, affecting a third or a quarter of the population of the world. And it was short-lived, so it petered out not long afterwards, maybe 1920, 1921, but it was in the sense short-lived.
What happened was that virus continued to transmit among humans. In fact, it continued until 1957 to transmit between humans. And probably what happened there is that the virus adapted to humans. It wasn't this avian or swine virus that came in and was accidentally more pathogenic in humans. In our lab here in Cambridge, we study both seasonal flu and pandemic flu from the standpoint of how does the virus evolve, and how can we predict that evolution and make vaccines to try to artificially evolve the virus both in the laboratory and in the computer to understand what it's going to do next and to make vaccines against those strains that will evolve in the future. So this is the basic science of studying evolution and trying to predict that evolution, something that nobody's ever been able to do for a complex organism. And then working to use that understanding to make better vaccines. On the pandemic flu side, we do a similar thing where we look to see how that virus is changing, how it changes in birds and how it changes in how that virus changes in other species, and to try to see what possible variants out there might be, and again to make vaccines that could protect
Yo, Dice, why are you so hostile, man?
Flu is very difficult to eradicate because it's constantly mutating and changing its genetic information. We work on the influenza virus, and in particular on the enzyme that copies the genetic information of the virus when it enters our cells. Specifically, we're interested in how this enzyme can do this activity and how it inserts mutations in the viral genome that lead to the formation of new strains to which we need to develop new vaccines. And we are also interested in when this enzyme messes up, how it triggers the innate immune system and helps cause disease.
We really don't know why we haven't seen a pandemic as deadly as the 1918 pandemic. Scientists and public health officials are extremely concerned. The National Risk Register, which is the way that our government plans what are all the risks to civil society in the UK, there's only 2 events that are up there in terms of the most catastrophic, and that's a terrorist event.
I don't know, guys. How long have I been working on this painting? Like, honestly, like painting on it. Because normally I'll talk for an hour and paint for an hour or so. I probably had like 3 or 4 sessions in here off camera so far. I did a couple of time-lapse videos. I don't know. So far, I probably got about 25 hours or something like that. 25 hours.
If either of those viruses did adapt to really transmit well between humans, there's a real concern that it could be as bad as the 1918 virus. And this is why there is so much research.
I'm probably about halfway.
To try to understand what's happening.
It's probably taking about 40 hours to do this. How about like 40 something hours before it's all said and done with?
It's not if, but when. Coming as a mathematician, it's happened a lot of times in the past, it will probably happen again. The 1918 pandemic is difficult because of lack of data, but the most recent influenza pandemic we had was in 2009. And from that pandemic, there is some very good data. If we understand how the 2009 pandemic spread, maybe that tells us something we can use to help control future pandemics. If we can't stop them, the alternative is at least to allocate our resources better to try and reduce the number of cases in each place.
Looking back 100 years to the last pandemic also invites the question of 100 years from now, what will we be like in terms of how well we are protected against flu, or what things we could do to protect ourselves in some situations. surely we'll be in a situation where we know more about what viruses are in the world and where they are. Surveillance will be so much better. Surely we'll be in a better situation where we have better drugs and better vaccines because we know more about the virus, so we know more about its weaknesses. We know more about our immune systems, and we know how to enable them to fight those pathogens better. At some point, we will have a universal vaccine that will protect us against flu for the rest of our lives. When this is a whole other question. There are a great number of approaches and really good ideas to doing this. There are already attempts at this that are at a quite advanced stage. It might be 10 years from now. It might be 20 or 30 or 40 years from now. We really don't know.
Would y'all consider taking that one vaccine that is supposed to keep you from contracting any kind of flu viruses after you take it?
An estimated 500 million people infected, between 50 and 100 million dead, a world torn apart by war and by a strange, deadly new disease. It swept across the world, leaving nowhere untouched. It was so deadly, rumors spread through the streets that the Black Death had returned. This was the Spanish flu of 1918, the deadliest pandemic of the 20th century. Epidemics have infected societies throughout history. Epidemics come and go, but some truly stand out for their viciousness. In recent history, there has been no pandemic more devastating than the flu of 1918. Sometimes called the Spanish flu, or swine flu. It killed about 675,000 in the United States alone. The outbreak came in the midst of World War I, and the flu would actually kill more troops than combat. The flu of 1918 was so deadly it killed more Americans than World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Yet Spanish flu was horrifying for even more reasons. It was very contagious, and it killed extremely quickly, sometimes in as few as 12 hours. It killed people in the prime of their lives, with the most victims being young, healthy people aged 20 to 40. Additionally, it killed some of its victims in bizarre, brutal ways, completely unlike a typical flu virus. Some symptoms actually closely resembled the plagues, which killed millions in the Middle Ages. But scientists have analyzed the pathogen's genome and verified it was not Black Death, which killed millions in 1918. It was just the flu. This video will cover how the flu began and how it spread across the world, the bizarre symptoms that made it so deadly, and how the flu pushed society to the very brink of collapse. If the epidemic continues its mathematical rate of acceleration, civilization could easily disappear from the face of the earth within a few weeks. Victor Vaughan, Surgeon General of the Army, October 1918. No one can be absolutely sure where the pandemic originated, but there are several theories. In northern France, there was an outbreak of a flu-like disease at a British military base in 1917. The base was located in a swampy area with lots of waterfowl and pigs. New flu epidemics often arise when people have close contact with sick birds or pigs. There was a separate outbreak of respiratory disease among soldiers from Southeast Asia who fought in World War I from 1916 to 1918. Most flus start in Southeast Asia, and some historians argue the soldier may have brought a new virus to Europe. But historian John Barry makes the case in his fascinating book, The Great Influenza, that the flu may have originated on a farm in rural Kansas by jumping from infected pigs to humans. Indeed, the first officially recognized cases of the Spanish flu emerged at a military base in Kansas. The U.S. had just entered World War I, and training and industry had ramped up at a rapid pace as the war machine fired up. But in rural Haskell County, Kansas, a war of another type was quietly beginning. Haskell County was in the grip of a deadly outbreak of what seemed to be a mysterious new disease. People in the community, farmers mostly, may have caught the new disease when a pathogen from sick pigs jumped species and began infecting humans. The new virus, the swine flu, was shockingly contagious and extremely deadly. A local doctor was terrified by the death toll of the new virus and contacted the U.S. Public Health Service for advice. His concern was noted, but nothing else was done. After all, it was a tiny rural backwater. How could it spread far in such a sparsely populated area? Slowly the virus began to die down as it ran out of new people to infect. Perhaps it would have stopped there had the times been different, but 1918 was the perfect breeding ground for a worldwide pandemic. In early 1918, every military base was teeming with young men training for war. The military hurried to build new barracks, hospitals, training areas, and facilities to support the influx of hundreds of thousands of men. Some of these men were volunteers, and some had been drafted. The strange new disease was just dying down in Haskell County when a few young men left there, headed to Camp Funston, Kansas, for training. Camp Funston, located at modern-day Fort Riley, was already over capacity, with 56,000 young men training for war. There hadn't been time to build enough barracks for all of them. It was the coldest winter on record east of the Rockies, yet many men were sleeping in tents without any heat and only thin blankets. In an effort to keep them all warm, the commander ordered all the men to move into barracks, violating the health and safety rules that dictated how much space each soldier should have. Inside the barracks, men huddled around stoves trying to keep warm. The men from Haskell County must have crowded in close too, even as they began to cough and sneeze. That's all it took. In the overcrowded barracks, the flu spread rapidly. It only took 6 days for the outbreak to begin. The men from Haskell County arrived on February 28th. Less than 1 week later, men began flooding into sick call. Within just a few weeks, the flu swept across the base, sickening thousands and killing between 38 and 50. It was a high death rate for the flu, but it was nothing compared to what was coming next. The virus was about to mutate and become much, much worse. Flu viruses are constantly mutating, and sometimes there will be a really big shift, or a virus that usually affects only animals mutates so it can infect people too. When that happens, it can be very deadly. The flu comes in waves. That's why we have a flu season. Although it may seem like a bad flu is done, the flu can hide for a while, or go infect people in a different part of the world and then return even worse. In the case of the 1918 flu, 3 waves of flu devastated the world. The first wave wasn't too bad, but the second and third waves were extremely dangerous. The outbreak at Camp Funston came just at the end of the flu season in the United States, so the first wave infected a lot of people, but then faded away. The military wasn't worried. They were grappling with a far more deadly outbreak of measles at the time. The flu virus seemed to fade away, but really it just went abroad to take on a world at war. It stalked into camp when the day was damp and chilly and cold, with a hand that was clammy and bony and bold, and its breath was icy and moldy and dank, and it killed so speedy and gloatingly greedy that it took away men from each company rank. The flu, Private Josh Lee, 1919. Nearly all the ships carrying American troops to war arrived at the port in Brest, France. In April of 1918, just as the flu outbreak was dying down at Camp Funston, an epidemic began in Brest and slowly began spreading throughout northern France. Despite the illness spreading in the city, more and more troops poured in. Healthy men would land, become infected, and then ship out to new duty stations and to the front line, carrying the disease through every small town and hamlet through which the armies traveled. The flu tore across France and followed the front lines into Belgium and the Netherlands. It jumped across the lines of war and began infecting the German army, actually affecting the outcomes of battle since so many troops were too sick to fight. It jumped from the German army to the German people. By May, it had reached Italy, where it crossed the Mediterranean and surged into North Africa. It also arrived in England by May, riding back on boats with troops heading home. Infection and death rates began to skyrocket in Spain and Portugal. The flu gained its name, the Spanish flu, from the early infection and high mortality rate in Spain, where reported 8 million died in May. Spain was neutral in World War I, and as a result, it was one of the only countries that was reporting the news without strict government censorship. Most countries didn't want to reveal to their enemies that they were battling an epidemic, and didn't want to affect their people's morale, so the governments pressured the media to hide and downplay the severity of the virus. However, in neutral Spain, the press was free to report the news accurately. Newspaper headlines in Spain screamed of an epidemic that was killing millions, while other countries only whispered of the flu. The world believed the flu was worse in Spain, when in actuality, Spain was the only one talking about it at first. The flu continued spreading beyond Western Europe. By July, it had jumped to Scandinavia and Greece. The same month, the flu crept its way into a tense Russia, where the Tsar and his family had just been executed, and the Bolsheviks were battling with other factions to see who would control the future of Russia. A boat filled with 6 sailors arrived in Mumbai, India at the end of May. First, a few dock workers reported sick. Then workers at the next docks became ill. And then men at the nearby warehouses got sick, and so on, into the city. Ships left those same infested docks and spread to other ports in Asia. Sick people boarded trains in Mumbai and spread the disease like wildfire along the railroad lines up into the subcontinent and continental Asia. The flu showed up in China around the same time, spreading inland from a dock in Shanghai. By June, it had arrived in Singapore, a world trade hub where the flu infected the dock workers and spread to the local population. From the bustling docks, sailors carried the flu south into Indonesia and north into Malaysia and Thailand, where it continued to spread. By July, it had reached sub-Saharan Africa, with infected sailors who arrived at the ports. It entered West Africa from ships arriving in Freetown, Sierra Leone. It infected Eastern Africa via the port in Mombasa, Kenya. Ships arriving into Cape Town set the virus loose in South Africa. From these ports, influenza ripped its way across the continent, devastating the population. By July, it had also reached Peru and begun spreading across South America. By August, it had returned to North America. By October, it had reached New Zealand and Japan. By November, a lethal outbreak was surging across Colombia, Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. Despite quarantines on ships entering port, dock restrictions, and a concerted effort at containment, it finally spread into Australia by 1919. In less than a year, the deadly flu had surged around the world. The flu was able to spread so efficiently for many reasons, including the movement of vast companies of troops around the world, and the conditions those troops were living in. World War I was desperately brutal, and trench warfare made for horrific living conditions and for the perfect breeding ground for disease. Men lived out in the open, with no protection from the freezing winter, the pounding rain, or the sweltering sun. Troops at the front lines lived in filthy trenches for months at a time, where they had to eat, sleep, and answer all the calls of nature within close contact with each other. When it rained, the trenches filled up with water that became rank and foul as it had nowhere to drain. Men's feet rotted in their boots, a condition called trench foot. Dead bodies lay decomposing in no man's land between the two armies. When it rained, water would wash excrement, decomposing body parts, and filth down into the trenches where the men lived. Constant bombing churned up the dirt and turned the ground into a sloppy swamp. The mud became so bad that in some places it was like quicksand. Planks were laid down for the men to walk on. There were cases of horses, pack mules, and even soldiers slipping off the walkways and drowning in the mud before they could struggle out of their heavy gear. By the end of the war, over 9 million combatants and 7 million civilians would die in the war. Thus, it's not surprising that when a virulent new virus arrived, it became an even more deadly foe than the enemy soldiers. At some point, in the summer of 1918, the flu mutated to become more deadly. It gave some people the normal symptoms of fever, chills, nausea, aches, and diarrhea, and many got sick, then recovered like a normal flu. Some were sick longer or died after catching a secondary infection, such as pneumonia. However, many people became violently ill with strange symptoms. In fact, in the July 1918 edition of the medical journal The Lancet, doctors argued that this strange epidemic couldn't be the flu because the symptoms didn't fit. Italian doctors argued the same. In some people, Spanish flu caused fevers that were so high people hallucinated. Some writhed in agonized muscle pain so bad that doctors thought they had dengue, also called breakbone fever. It made some people temporarily or even permanently blind, deaf, or paralyzed. Some lost the ability to smell. Some had strong vertigo and would fall over if they tried to walk. Extreme ear infections developed very quickly, going from the first pain to the eardrums rupturing within only a few hours. Some had terrible headaches and double vision. Severe mucus excretions and inflammation made it hard for victims to breathe. Some people coughed so hard they tore their abdominal muscles. Doctors doing autopsies saw lungs so damaged that they resembled those of people who died from poisonous gas in the war. Some people developed a symptom most physicians had never seen before. Tiny puffs of air would leak out from tears in the lungs and get trapped beneath the skin, puffing up in little pockets all over their bodies. When they moved, the pockets would crackle like a bowl of rice. Some people developed hemorrhagic fever, which, like Ebola, causes its victims to bleed. An Army report described the flu as a rapidly escalating infection and lungs choked with blood, fatal in from 24 to 48 hours. Some people bled from their nose, their ears, and their eyes. Some people with the 1918 flu became so oxygen-starved they began to turn blue, or even looked black, a condition called cyanosis. People reportedly turned so dark that it was difficult to distinguish white people from people of color. For this reason, the flu picked up the nickname the Blue Death, and many wondered if the Black Death had returned. When people began turning blue, doctors knew they wouldn't survive more than a few hours. The flu was also terrifying because it could kill so quickly. Many victims died within a day or two, or even hours of showing their first symptoms. According to a story recounted in the book The Great Influenza, a man in Cape Town, South Africa boarded a streetcar just as the conductor died. During the 3-mile ride to his house, 6 more people on the streetcar died. When the driver died, he got off the streetcar and walked home. We've had a number of cases where people were perfectly healthy and died within 12 hours. Charles Edward Winslow, epidemiologist and professor at Yale University. In late summer of 1918, the flu virus returned to America, but this time it was far more deadly. In August, a ship full of sick people arrived in New York City from Europe. 4 men had already died at sea, and 200 more people on the ship were sick. Many were taken to hospitals, but they weren't quarantined. In the following week, several more ships full of sick people arrived. The same was happening in other deep-water ports, like Boston, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. At the same time as the virus was arriving and spreading in ports, ships left those same ports headed for Canada, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America, carrying infected people. In early September, there was an outbreak at Navy Pier in Boston. The pier was quarantined, but officers still moved between bases. An officer was probably responsible for carrying the flu to nearby Camp Devens. At first, just a few men reported sick, and then within only a few days an epidemic broke out. By mid-September, thousands of men were sick, in many cases violently so. Of those who were sick, 75% were so ill they had to be hospitalized. The sheer number of patients overwhelmed the medical staff of the military hospital. The hospital had been designed to treat a maximum of 1,200 troops at one time, yet more than 6,000 patients were crammed in. Cots were stuffed into every available space, in hallways and offices, even on outdoor porches. The doctors and nurses fell ill. There were simply not enough healthy people to care for the thousands of sick people. So many died that they couldn't all fit in the hospital morgue. The dead were stacked up one on top of another, like firewood in the hallway outside the morgue. Every day they were carted away, and every day the hall filled up again. The Army medical officers issued an order that no men should be sent to or shipped out of Camp Devens. However, that's not what happened. A group of officers left Camp Devens, headed to Camp Grant in Illinois. Despite the rules against it, the chief officer there had authorized overcrowding due to a shortage in barracks, once again giving the ideal environment for the disease to spread. Shortly after arriving, the officers from Camp Devens became sick. The men were quarantined, but it was already too late. Within 2 days of the first cases, the flu was widespread throughout the camp. Within 4 days of the first case, men started dying. Within 5 days, doctors and nurses became sick and started dying. By 6 days, there were 4,000 men admitted to the hospital, and they converted 10 barracks into temporary hospitals. By 7 days, they were running out of medicine, disinfectant, and other medical supplies. By 9 days, they converted 9 more barracks to serve as hospitals, bringing the number up to 20. They didn't have enough beds, sheets, or ambulances to carry all the infirm. When they ran out of beds, soldiers were ordered to stuff straw into sacks to use as mattresses for the sick. They still didn't have enough. They tried to make enough face cloths to cover people's mouths to fight the spread of germs, but they ran out of cloth. The Red Cross set up a station to notify relatives that their loved ones were dying or dead. Now relatives poured into the midst of a deadly epidemic. Healthy relatives were escorted by coughing service members to identify dead bodies in the morgue. They crowded into the overfilled hospitals to visit ill loved ones. Desperate parents and wives tried to bribe nurses and orderlies to give special care to their soldier. It became such a problem that the head officer issued a warning about accepting bribes. Those relatives would leave the camp and carry the infection out into the civilian community, into local towns, onto cross-country trains, and ultimately back to their hometowns. Civilian health officials called for an emergency quarantine of Camp Grant, but the virus was already out. 4 days after the first reported case, a trainload of troops had left Camp Grant to go cross-country to Camp Hancock near Augusta, Georgia. For the journey of almost 1,000 miles, the men were packed tightly into train cars with poor ventilation. In the tight quarters, men coughed, became feverish, and began bleeding from their eyes and ears. They infected each other swiftly, and the virus swept along the train. The train stopped repeatedly along the journey to refuel, and the men who could still walk got off the train to get a break from the hacking coughs of the sick and delirious men. There they interacted with railroad workers and curious locals who had come to see the troops. They infected town after town for almost 1,000 miles. When they finally arrived in Georgia, 2,000 of the 3,000 men were so sick they needed to be hospitalized immediately. They started a new outbreak at Camp Hancock. Historians don't know how many of the men from the train died, but one report from Fort Leonard Wood claims 10%. Yet when hundreds began dying, the medical staff at the hospital stopped keeping careful records. They were just too overwhelmed by all the dead. One robust person showed the first symptoms at 4:00 p.m. and died by 10:00 a.m. The Journal of the American Medical Association. The same thing would happen at bases across America. At Camp Custer in Michigan, 2,800 troops reported sick in a single day. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of troops were still shipping out to Europe. By this point, the government knew how dangerous the flu was, so they tried to contain the virus on ships. Visibly sick men were not allowed on the ships, but this didn't make much difference in the end. The flu virus incubates for a few days before any signs of infection are visible. On board the ships, the men were locked into their bunk rooms for most of the voyage across the sea, and armed military police enforced the segregation. On most ships, about 400 men were locked into each crowded bunk room in cramped quarters with little ventilation. Although the troops were segregated from others in the ship, they still shared the same mess hall where they all ate. They would file through, breathing the same air and touching the same tables and chairs as the group before. On one ship, called the Leviathan, the flu broke out almost immediately, despite the quarantine efforts. Within 2 days, it had overwhelmed the ship's medical services. The doctors and nurses were laid up sick alongside their patients, delirious, coughing, and blood pouring from their bodies. The blood pooled on the floor, and the nurses, who were still well enough to work, walked through the puddles, leaving bloody footprints on the deck. Finally, there were so many sick men that they began laying them on the deck of the ship out in the elements. They even lay there in storms, because the well were too overwhelmed to move them, and the ill were too sick to move themselves. At first, the deaths came spaced apart, and the officers took careful notes in the captain's log of the Leviathan. At first, they wrote the date and time of death, the name and rank of the deceased, their unit and cause of death. But only 1 week after leaving New York, the officers were so overwhelmed they wrote only name and time of death. The captain's log shows 2 deaths at 2 a.m., 1 at 2:02 a.m., 2 at 2:15 a.m. It continued like that around the clock. The healthy must have been terrified, locked onto a ship filled with a deadly plague with nowhere to escape. They began burying men at sea. At first they were solemn ceremonies, but after so many, the funerals became routine. They would read a name, say a brief prayer, and slide the body off the boat, then on to the next.
Bye, nigga.
The same was happening in every boat carrying troops across the ocean. Medical advisors begged the Navy to stop the troop movements, but the war machine needed men.
Lieutenant.
At the same time, it was infecting the civilian population from port to port and along the railway lines.
James Byrd,
However, the very
Admiral.
worst outbreak probably occurred in Philadelphia, and it was made immeasurably worse by mismanagement by leaders who ignored warnings from public health doctors. Had public health measures been implemented, Perhaps much of the death and suffering could have been avoided. Philadelphia in 1918 was teeming with people. Hundreds of thousands had swarmed the city because of the new job opportunities working at steel plants, docks, railroad yards, and industries that supplied the war. Without enough housing for the influx, poor people were crowded into squalid, filthy slums that lacked indoor plumbing. Multiple families would cram into one apartment and share an outhouse in an alleyway with hundreds of people. Sometimes people shared not only apartments but beds, even sleeping in shifts. The boarding houses would rent out beds for 6 or 8 hours at a time. When one worker woke up to go to work, another worker would get into the newly vacated bed and sleep, same sheets and all. The streets were notoriously filthy, with rat infestations and gutters filled with trash, animal, and even human feces. With people living in overcrowded conditions, exhausted from hard labor and weak from poor nutrition, dirty water, and bad air quality, it was a perfect breeding ground for an epidemic. I had a little bird. Its name was Enza. I opened the window, and influenza. Children's jump roping song, 1918.
Influenza?
A ship full of 6 sailors arrived into the Philadelphia Navy Yard in mid-September. Within a few days, the Navy hospital was overrun, and the Navy began sending sailors to civilian hospitals in the city. As sailors began dying, the flu spread to civilians. 2 days after the first sailor arrived at the hospital, multiple doctors and nurses felt fine as they started their shifts, yet collapsed and became desperately ill within hours. However, the health board for the city didn't want people to panic. They downplayed the severity of the disease. After the death of several sailors and civilians, the health board confidently declared the disease had reached its zenith and already begun to decline. It had indeed. At the same time, the federal government was desperate for money from war bonds to fund the war. People would buy bonds, essentially loaning the government money for a promise of being paid back later with interest. Every city had a quota of bonds they had to sell, and Philadelphia was ready to hold the Liberty Loan Parade to sell war bonds. Public health doctors begged the city to cancel the parade, terrified that it would cause the outbreak to become an epidemic. The city government ignored them. On September 28th, hundreds of thousands of people jammed into the downtown streets to watch the parade. In that huddled crowd, all crushed together, it only took a few coughing, sneezing people to launch the epidemic. Within 76 hours, just 3 days later, the city's 31 hospitals had run out of bed space. They were completely full. Some hospitals tried to cram in more by laying patients on cots in the hallways, in offices, and on balconies. In some cases, the sick were laid on the floor next to a dying patient. Once the patient died, the body was taken away, and the new patient would be lifted into the same bed, still warm from the previous occupant. The city opened several temporary emergency hospitals, but it wasn't enough. Hospitals started refusing to accept any more patients. People lined up outside begging to be let in. Some died standing in line. Even for those who got in, care was non-existent for most people. The hospitals ran out of medicine. The doctors and nurses were overtaxed, and they were dropping from the flu. They were desperate for help. People with no medical training volunteered. Physicians and nurses came out of retirement. Medical schools closed, and first-year medical students were put in charge of an entire floor of a hospital. One medical student reported that during the height of the outbreak, 1/4 of all the patients in the hospital died every day. Nurses were so overtaxed, they began adding toe tags to the living so they could tag several at once. Once a patient turned blue, it was only a matter of hours to death, so they felt confident in tagging them. Sometimes there wasn't any time for any intervention. Some people died within 24 hours of contracting the flu. A nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital started her shift in the morning and suddenly fell ill. She died 12 hours after first feeling sick. The number of dead kept growing. 5 days after the city held the Liberty Loan Parade, city leaders finally acted. The health department banned all public meetings. Churches, schools, and theaters were closed. They left the bars open, but those too were closed the next day. The courts closed and city services shut down. It took only a few days for the city's operations to completely grind to a halt. Within just 10 days, Philadelphia went from a few hundred cases of flu and a couple deaths per day to hundreds of thousands of people sick and hundreds dying every day, all because they ignored public health guidelines. By 3 weeks after the parade, the death toll stood at 4,500. So many died that they couldn't be buried fast enough. Grave diggers were sick or refused to bury flu victims. The bodies started piling up inside morgues and funeral homes. Some undertakers raised their prices 500% to try and cash in. Most ran out of coffins. One funeral home that hadn't run out hired guards because people were trying to steal the coffins. People began wrapping their dead in blankets or sewing together flour sacks to use as shrouds. No one came to take the bodies, and there was nowhere to bring them, so the dead stayed in the homes. People wrapped them in blankets and set them in closed-off rooms. The bodies were laid on porches or stacked in back alleys. In the poor, overcrowded tenement houses where multiple families lived in one apartment, there were no porches or spare rooms to put the bodies. They set them in the corners or stacked them in the alleyways next to the shared outhouses with drinking water pumps. Sometimes, people were so sick that the person in bed next to them would die, and they couldn't gather the strength to take the body away. The city began to smell, the stench of death hanging heavily in the air. Finally, families began digging their own graves to bury their dead. Everyone was terrified. People avoided each other. There were cases of children whose parents got sick, and the children starved because no one would go near them in case the child was sick. This was particularly a problem since those who were most likely to die were people aged between 20 to 40, many of them parents. People couldn't get food because no trucks were delivering goods in the city. The streets fell silent. Every business was closed. People hid inside their homes. The streetcars stopped. The police cars stopped. The entire city ceased to function. You were constantly afraid. You were afraid because you saw so much death around you. You were surrounded by death. When each day dawned, you didn't know whether you would be there when the sun set that day. It wiped out entire families from the time that the day began in the morning to bedtime at night. There wasn't any single soul left. William Sardo, Washington, D.C. The Philadelphia city government was by now non-functional. Wealthy Philadelphia families appealed to the federal government for help, but there was no help to send. Cities all across America were buckling beneath the weight of the epidemic, and the federal government was busy managing the outbreak on military bases and among troops in Europe. With the city government failing to act, the women of elite Philadelphia families, many of the same who had organized the Liberty Loan Parade, banded together to start outreach efforts. They gathered together civic leaders from across the city to start planning. They set up a special hotline to answer questions about the flu, but had a hard time keeping it staffed because so many employees were sick. They set up local neighborhood leaders who would organize distribution of food and medical care. They set up soup kitchens in the schools and food delivery to sick people when possible. 500 people volunteered their cars to be used as ambulances and to deliver food and drive doctors around to treat the sick. However, there was a desperate need for more volunteers, and most people were too afraid to get involved. Leaders begged for more help, but people turned away. The fabric of society began to break down. City leaders who hadn't bothered to attend meetings of the outreach effort finally got involved. They seized the city's emergency fund to pay for supplies and pay health workers. They opened additional morgues and sent out policemen to try and clear the piled-up bodies. Like the ancient plagues, people carried their dead out to the streets. There, the bodies were loaded onto open trucks or horse-drawn wagons. There were no coffins, so they stacked them one on top of the other. Also, like in the days of the plague, they stopped trying to bury people individually and began digging mass graves where hundreds of bodies were dumped in. The city used construction equipment to dig long trenches and push the bodies in. Someone would stand by the trench, say a prayer, and then the steam shovels would push dirt over the piles of bodies. By late October, the epidemic was finally beginning to loosen its death grip on the city. In its aftermath, it left a death toll of 13,000. It also left thousands of orphaned children, a shortage of food and goods, and a stalled city that had to slowly grind its most basic services back into motion. Finally, it left a changed people, filled with fear, wearied by war and disease, and crushed by grief. The people of Phoenix are facing a crisis. Almost every home in the city has been stricken with the plague. Arizona Republican, November 8, 1918. In other cities and towns across America, the news was the same. In New York City, 33,000 people died before the statisticians stopped counting. Some small towns tried to keep the virus out by quarantining themselves. They shut down all businesses and canceled public gatherings. People were ordered to stay in their homes and not touch or visit others. Some towns made it illegal to shake hands. In other towns, police were dispatched to nail signs on the doors of homes where people were sick. The signs said, "Influenza," in red letters. Rumors spread in Phoenix, Arizona, that dogs spread the disease. Policemen killed dogs in the streets, and people killed their own pets. Towns in Colorado set up barricades on the roads, and men guarded them with shotguns, preventing anyone from coming in. Other towns couldn't stop the trains from rolling through on their local platforms, but they refused to let anyone step off the trains. Anyone who did was thrown in prison and quarantined. It didn't work. The virus still slipped in. The only place that escaped the worst of the rap was San Francisco, and historians credit that to aggressive response by the local government, who listened to their public health officials. Public Health Director William Hassler quarantined all naval stations before they had any reported cases. He knew it was only a matter of time. He ordered all public schools and gathering places closed. He divided the cities into separate districts with distinct support staff so as to segregate outbreaks. He laid out plans and organized the flu response before the flu ever hit the city so they would be ready when it did. The city's government, medical, and civic organizations banded together to educate citizens on prevention such as hand washing, avoiding public places, and wearing a face mask. While Philadelphia's government was still denying there was a problem, San Francisco authorities were distributing 100,000 face masks. Police enforced the face mask rule at gunpoint and actually shot people who refused to wear masks in the streets. As the second wave diminished throughout the country, San Francisco rejoiced for having missed the flu. The flu would mutate once more and rage through the world for a third time, but infecting and killing fewer people. This time it would be less severe. This time it did hit San Francisco because they thought the flu was already over. The third wave hit the Southwest and Midwest hard, but for the rest of America, the worst of the flu had passed. Even as America woke from the nightmare, the epidemic had left its imprint. Right at the height of harvest time, farmers had been too sick to farm, and workers didn't show up to gather the food in. Food that was harvested rotted in warehouses because there was no one to transport it. There was a lag while the country tried to catch up on shipping food and goods, and store shelves and markets stayed empty for some time because goods hadn't been delivered. As winter rolled in, there was a shortage of coal and other goods. However, the weary country still rejoiced, for an armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. The war was finally over, even as the plague and its effects lingered on. In the U.S., it killed about 675,000. The flu killed an estimated 3% of the entire world population. In Latin America, the flu killed 10 out of every 1,000 people. In Africa, about 15 out of every 1,000 died, and in parts of Asia, the death rate was as high as 35 per thousand. In Tahiti, it killed 10% of the population, and in Western Samoa, 20% of the population died. In India alone, it killed about 20 million people. You may be asking yourself, could a deadly flu like that happen again? It's important to understand that the Spanish flu was devastating for a number of reasons unique to that time. However, the essential formula for epidemics still exists. Viruses sometimes jump species, for instance from pigs to human. This could happen at any time, anywhere in the world. And of course, flu viruses are constantly mutating. Usually mutations are minor, but occasionally a big mutation can happen. This has happened a few times in recent history. For instance, the Russian flu of 1889 killed about 1 million people. The Asian flu of 1957 killed about 2 million. And the Hong Kong flu of 1968 also killed about 2 million. Then in 2018, exactly 100 years after the outbreak of Spanish flu, a mutation brought a particularly deadly flu to the US and Australia. As of 2018, there is one strain of avian flu, an H5 type, that has managed to infect humans, but so far cannot jump between people. However, that particular strain of flu, according to Donald Burke, MD, former director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Immunization Research, of the people who have been affected, it has been deadly in over 75% of cases. If that type, it could be catastrophic. So could it happen again? Yes, it could. As Burke said, When it comes to the probability of the pandemic flu, I think everyone would say it's not if, it's when. However, there's reason to be hopeful. When a new kind of flu emerged in 2009, a swine flu, just like the Spanish flu, officials did not waste any time acting. Public health officials acted swiftly, putting emergency epidemic plans into operation. We were lucky that the 2009 swine flu, though very contagious, was not a deadly strain, and it showed us that response matters a great deal. In fact, the way we respond to the next big epidemic could mean the difference between life or death. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe to Education World for more videos.
I'm Jeff Bezos.
What is your claim to fame?
I'm the founder of Amazon.com.
From the award-winning producers of The Facebook Dilemma,
Richest guy in the world.
Frontline investigates Amazon,
Amazon taking over the world a good thing?
questioning those who run the company,
What would you say to someone who feels as though humans are increasingly being treated like robots?
That's not the experience that I had in setting it up.
and those no longer there.
Most people would assume there is a pretty high safety standard on Amazon.
And that assumption would be incorrect. The tools are not what I call battle tested.
Amazon is a monopoly. The question for the democracy is, are we okay with one company essentially winning capitalism?
How do you and Jeff think about the call to break you guys up?
Simply because the company's been successful doesn't mean it's somehow too big.
Now on Frontline,
Domination was very much the idea.
Amazon Empire.
Jeff Bezos has already conquered the retail frontier. Now he's got a plan to colonize the finance.
He's laying out his plans for colonizing
Bezos
space.
is known for going big. Now he's literally shooting for the moon.
In May of 2019, Jeff Bezos, the richest person on the planet, unveiled his latest invention.
This is Blue Moon. Time to go back to the moon, this time to stay.
Jeff has said over and over again that the most important work he's doing is work in space. What he's built with Amazon is really important and really interesting, and it's revolutionized commerce. But it's only revolutionized commerce.
Bezos' plan is to chart a new course for the future of humanity.
Manufactured worlds rotated to create artificial gravity with centrifugal force. These are very large structures, miles on end, and they hold 1 million people or more each.
It's an idea he's had since he was a teenager.
This is me in high school, and I want to highlight this quote: "The Earth is finite. If the world economy and population is to keep expanding, space is the only way to go." I still believe that.
The way Jeff Bezos sees it is that consumerism is an example
I think I'm gonna stop right here. I'm at a good stopping point. When we come back tomorrow,
future generations.
I can work on this bracelet, this chain, like this link bracelet here.
These are beautiful.
And then we can bring the rest of the arms down and get those highlights here and here. And then that'll be all of that. All of the skin will be done with 2 layers of paint. And then we can start working on the shirt.
Once you start connecting the dots, you see that Amazon is building all of the invisible infrastructure for our futures.
Amazon announced a healthcare partnership.
Amazon is helping the CIA build a secure cloud.
How much of the internet do you run?
It's a good question. It's a lot, though.
But in recent years, Amazon and Bezos have come under scrutiny for their aggressive.
I can't wait to start working on the highlights on the hair, yo. I always like doing the highlights and trying to get those individual strands of hair in there.
We should hear about it. For the past year, we've been investigating how Jeff Bezos built his empire, and at what cost.
And so think about this. Big things start small.
I'm liking that shit, yo.
Jeff Bezos' empire has its roots not in Silicon Valley, but on Wall Street. That's where the young Princeton graduate went to work in the early 1990s, at a secretive hedge fund called D.E. Shaw.
David Shaw was the one who revolutionized Wall Street by introducing data. And I think Jeff really embraced that.
Alright. Somebody just gave me a bunch of likes on Instagram. Thank you. I like likes. Alright guys, we're out of here for today. Alright, tomorrow's Friday. Tomorrow's Friday. So I'll probably do an after work stream tomorrow. Then Saturday and Sunday morning, you know, we're going to be in here for a few hours there. Oh yeah, that's what it is. I was like, let me get the 36 by 48 until you stand beside that thing. Yo, this ain't no little painting, yo. This is a big ass painting, yo. Big ass face on that shit. Goddamn big face. But yeah, that's why I like these size canvases, yo. This shit makes a statement. This shit says, I spend money on good shit. Soon as somebody see that shit, you know that's what they're gonna ask. Damn, how much you pay for that? None of your damn business. I spend money on good shit. Some people got taste. Some people don't. But yeah, wherever you hang it, wherever you hang that shit, yo, that shit gonna make a statement. Looking like, goddamn. Well, when did you get that done now? Ooh, so sweet. So sweet, so sweet. Got a Chris in the new crib with a beautiful portrait. Yes, ma'am. I ain't hating on you not one little bit. Yep. I think I'm gonna eat me some dinner. 7:30. Probably eat some dinner, play the video game for a minute, and take my ass to bed. Cause I'm a essential worker and I have work tomorrow. Unlike some of you telecommuting motherfuckers, I ain't gonna call nobody out. Some of you fuckers get to stay home and get pajamas and slippers all the day. But not me. I have to go out into the field and handle my business. So, au revoir, adieu, ciao, ta-ta, adios, and so long.